Thank you very much. Welcome to your Tom lunchtime doubleheader for the Red Team track. So who am I? I'm Tom Harrison. I've got over 15 years in various different types of InfoSec, with about half of that being on the offensive side. Done a whole bunch of red teaming, and I'm now head of offensive security for a large financial company that's probably a pretty trivial OSINT piece of exercise to be able to find out which company. I classify myself as an adventure hacker, which is what I think red teamers fall under. That not only do we get to do hacking, but we also get to do things in person and about and doing things, that are actually exciting with that side of things. I'm a gamer. I'm a dad of 2 toddlers and 2 teenagers. If you want to do high intensity, low complexity social engineering, I recommend parenting teenagers. I'm a complete psychology, language, systems, tech, gaming nerd. Like any of that stuff, I'll rant about for hours. So what's this talk? This is a collection of learnings from mostly social engineering related stuff. So about 5-6 years ago, I started to go really deep on the people side of security, having done the technical side for ages. And then naturally went around conferences talking to people who had similar interests, digging things out of them, dealing with red teams as part of work, as well as the stuff that I've learned from when I've been doing social engineering exercises and that sort of stuff. It's trying to look at social engineering as part of an attack path. So rather than just using it at the start, using it throughout what red teams are doing in order to gain extra compromise and confuse blue teams. I'm going to look at more than just that initial first phish and trying to gain initial access. I'm not going to be showing any, people security 0 days. I'm not going to go, hey, if you say this magic word to people, they'll let you through doors or anything like that. And likewise, the majority of other stuff I'm presenting is mostly around kind of stuff that's been publicly released or is just kind of useful when you're in that situation. So standard disclaimers, don't break the law, only test systems you're allowed to test. Even red teamers, if you're doing social engineering or physical stuff, get it cleared with legal before you actually go and do it, because different countries, different laws, all that sort of stuff. Don't break ethics. So for me, this is a big one. If you're a consultancy team coming in to do red teaming, you don't want the company you're testing to be like, you made 6 of our employees cry. And likewise, if you're working internal as an OffSec team, then you don't want to be making your colleagues cry, because that's not going to help either. So in general, try and leave people feeling happy for having met you rather than sad for it. These are obviously my opinions, nothing to do with my employer or anyone else. Cool. So social engineering 101, or not really social engineering 101 because there's not enough time for that. So I consider it to be the art or science of influencing or manipulating humans into doing something. So really broad, but kind of covers the main concepts that we do with it. So we use pretext, which is basically your excuse for why you are asking them to do a particular thing. I'm Dave, the aircon man, who's come to fix that broken aircon unit in your data center, is an example of a pretext. We leverage a lot of human trust. So it's always important for me to be considerate of where you are, who you're talking to, what your pretext is, and what the trust exists between you and the other people in an organization or the people that you're trying to deal with or socially engineer. There's a whole ream of talks, books, research that cover social engineering in a lot more depth than I've got a chance to do here. So I kind of covered this to hopefully do the kind of really rough overview, but do dive deeper and do your own research. Cool. So we're going to skip through different stages of the kill chain. Whilst I've used the phrase kill chain for the Lockheed Martin structure of how attacks happen, these days it's not that lateral and it's always a bit of a poor model. So I'll kind of skip through probably mostly MITRE ATT&CK kind of classifications as to how you classify a kill chain. So reconnaissance. So active recon. So the idea of, rather than the kind of classic passive recon and OSINT that most red teams do, trying to actually elicit stuff by engaging and contacting the organization or, actually digging and speaking to people. So one of the things that I always find is a really good way to find out stuff that you haven't managed to pick up from the external recon. So if you're like, we're still not sure what AV they're using, when you're talking to a user and you go, oh, what's the little icon that's next to the clock in the bottom right? They'll go, oh yeah, it's this weird M with a shield around it, and they're running McAfee, for example. So always be ready when you're doing this sort of stuff to, the same way if you're doing a like pen test or red team and you will like spam, do a mass phish right at the start, you expect that the defenders are going to spot that and then are going to be like, we don't trust that domain anymore. So apply the same rules when you're doing vishing or anything like that to make sure that you're using new phone numbers. You're not using the same pretext you've used before. You're not using the same email addresses you before. You are engaging to find out information, but once that information's got, that is the end of this kind of section of the campaign. So burn whatever it is you're using so they're not just going to detect you when you start using it again later on. And then this is the really, really useful bit. So anyone who does this type of testing will go, we always end up falling back to OSINT and Recon and things like that as you go through the test to learn more with the things you've already found. So this is active recon step, like be ready to go back in and kind of go, cool, this is what we know now. We can now be a more convincing person asking the help desk for help rather than a less convincing one. So vishing for intelligence. So a load of information can come just from a conversation with people. So as well as stuff like, hey, what version of OS are they using? What software's on their machines? What AV are they using? You also get a whole bunch of cultural and language stuff that you normally consider to be kind of outside the scope a little bit of kind of the cyber side of testing, but it's so useful to be able to use that language, use that information, use what the people have told you when you are engaging other humans in an organization. So being able to get internally transferred is one of the most brilliant things when you're doing vishing-based testing. You're coming from an internal number that someone's just forwarded you from, and you've got that moment to potentially completely switch the pretext you're using. So initially you were a customer looking for help with a particular product that you're running, and then when they transfer you through, you get there and you know that you're coming from an internal number, and you go, yeah, one of the people on the help desk told me I'm a sysadmin, I need to help you with the problems you've got on your product that we're using at the moment. So being able to kind of quickly turn that and go, I need to switch to something that's got internal trust versus a sort of external and customer trust is really, really useful. It's worthwhile mentioning that this stuff's decaying. So the more people are using Teams, the more people are kind of using ticketing software, that sort of stuff. Less and less, it's kind of all handled by phone systems. So you kind of have to expect that if you're going outside of like help desks or, incident desks, that sort of thing, you're probably going to end up not being able to find a phone number to talk to someone. So speaking of which, Recon the Helpdesk. So help desks are absolutely amazing for the amount of information you can pull from them. So everything from, hey, I'm a new starter, can you tell me how I get my password sorted and where I should find it and that sort of stuff, through to, hey, how do I report an incident with this piece of software or this server that I've got issues with? And then they also spit back at you things like terminology. Do they use the term tickets? Do they use the term incidents? Do they, refer to servers in a certain way? Are there certain naming conventions? That sort of stuff. It's all things that you can mine from a help desk who are, by virtue of the name, trying to be helpful. Again, this is one of those things that you can use multiple times throughout an op as you sort of get through it to go, this is an area where we want to now get a ticket raised for this machine, or we want to persuade them to do a certain type of thing at a certain point. The help desk is an instant source for all of that sort of stuff. And then the other thing is, as people know, a lot of social engineering pretexts involve, hey, I'm the guy from IT, just because it's second nature to the vast majority of us being able to go, yes, I know technical stuff and I can talk networks and IT to you. So being able to listen to them talk to you gives you a kind of really good basis for what you build your pretext off from when you want to go and kind of pretend to be an IT admin or something later on. Cool. So that's reconnaissance. So we're going to go on to initial access. So this is probably a little bit untrue, but certainly single stage phishing is dying. So the idea of the kind of phishing awareness campaigns, that sort of thing, and people sending just one email in, it getting a single click and then being able to compromise based on that, is getting harder and harder and harder. I've listed out there the kind of things that will prevent you, or the things you have to overcome. So things like, hey, has my origin domain for the email got a decent reputation? Is it configured how they're expecting an email server to be configured so it looks legit? Then when emails come in, is the gateway going to detonate your malware? Is it going to detect it based on signature? Got to dodge all that stuff before you even land on the host. Then when you land on the host, you've got AV and EDR to cope with, as well as user awareness, which I've worked with a lot of really good education awareness teams. It's getting better and better, and it's getting harder and harder to trick users into actually just clicking it because they expect Phish to look like that. And then that damn external email banner. So if you work for a large enterprise company, the vast majority of them these days have got a lovely, incredibly bright, eye-blinding piece of dreadful UI design that says this is an external email, which is actually really, really, really effective at making people be a little bit more suspicious about what it is they're clicking on. And then you've landed, you've bypassed all that stuff. Your payload's still got to reach back out to your C2 infrastructure. You've still got to get that kind of last hook in. And then you've got to go through things like command and control, domain, reputation. You've got to get past the web gateway and whether it's going to detect your comms channel that you're using. Then you've got to evade NDS or behavior-based stuff. You've got to look at whether DNS is being looked into and kind of inspected. Whole bunch of stuff, which makes it really hard. And as an attacker, you don't really want to go the really hard route if you can avoid it. So instead, multi-stage phishing, which is really great because you're not trying to go, hey, click this link. You're trying to say, hey, engage with me so I can start building rapport and start to gain a little bit of your trust to eventually leverage that for something else. So it's really good to make sure you're doing your kind of OSINT and degrees of kind of knowing who you're targeting. You don't necessarily do mass phish for this type of stuff because it tends to be that you want to selectively kind of group stuff to make it a little bit more convincing and start a conversation. But you do want to do it in bulk still and hit a reasonable amount of people. The beautiful thing about this is that you're trying to find people who might be susceptible to social engineering. So sending out an initial start of a conversation with people from an unknown address instantly identifies the people that are likely to be susceptible to social engineering. So you're kind of completing your own pre-screening of them before you even start attacking. Conversations are really good for leveraging your pretext. So it's difficult to get in one email, make someone believe that you are a guy from the IT help desk or something similar to that. If you're doing it over a long conversation, you start talking about work, you start talking about, what you're doing today, kind of break out of some of the standard routines that people expect. You get a lot more chance to influence them and kind of get them on your side. And hopefully by the time you get to the point where you're like, hey, yeah, can you click this or can you go to this website and run this? They're already believing that you can't be one of those Phish people because one of those Phish people sends loads of mails and aren't real people. They're just automated systems out there on the internet somewhere. So then we're talking about blended attacks. So this is a kind of the idea of crossing over multiple streams of social engineering. So going from things like phishing through to vishing through to impersonation is a really good way of gaining trust, gaining people believing into the pretext you're using. I spoke to a friend of mine who's a PhD in a history-related subject, and she was talking about how, the multiple source idea, that you don't believe anything in history unless it comes from multiple sources. And I think that's a lot of what kind of forms that foundation. As a human, if you're getting something from both a phone call and an email, you're a lot more likely to believe it than just either one of the two independently. And I tend to find that kind of ramping up the fidelity curve, so starting out with phishing and then following it with a phone call, or starting out with a phone call and then following by something in person, is kind of the best way to do it. It's difficult to kind of do it the other way around and go, yeah, I'm in person, but I'm going to send you a phishing email later. It kind of defeats the purpose all the time. So, vishing for remote code execution. So, obviously people find it a lot harder to say no when you're on voice rather than just clicking delete on a phish. Particularly British people really don't like saying no. I think it's unnatural inbuilt manners. They love letting you tailgate. They love trying to help you out when you're on the phone. There's a really weird, much as I kind of hate the UI design and sort of development lifecycle people, the idea of a target journey is something you should definitely spend time considering. So going, hey, how difficult is it for them to actually run through my kind of process to be able to get exploitation? So can I easily point them at the right website? Are they going to get alerts that say this might be dodgy? That sort of thing. Going, hey, what are they going to see? How do I need to talk them through it? And kind of being ready to do that initial user support to get your payload landed. Ideally, you come across as better and better supporting of your payload than the actual help desk would if they were trying to get them to do something. So this is where that initial recon, that digging in and going, hey, this is what services they're running, this is what security controls they're running, really, really useful. So impersonation, which is the in-person part of social engineering, the actually showing up and pretending to be someone, is an incredibly deep and complex part of social engineering. There's a whole bunch of different stuff that you can read up about it. It's very, very deep. There's a lot of crossover with physical, so you'll find that you're effectively doing physical pen testing, like a lot of people refer to it as overt and covert physical pen testing. So it's important to have your pretext kind of at the ready. So both knowing who it is you're pretending to be, what you need to say if you get challenged, that sort of stuff, as well as the context. So knowing whereabouts in the organization you are. Like, if you're just walking around, they'll expect most colleagues to be, hey, that guy's just stood in an office. Whereas if you're stood in a data hall or something like that, you need to have a pretext ready that fits the context of where you're being challenged and stuff like that. So It's also good to know when to switch context. So, having a colleague badge to be able to switch out for a visitor pass, things like that, of knowing what is the best person to be or what is the best pretext to use when you're in different situations within an organization. So we're going to move on to lateral movement, and we'll talk about sort of moving from host to host and trying to confuse and baffle the blue team. So trust is really good for being assumed when you are internal. So that phishing banner, which I complain about endlessly, has the added benefit of, whilst they're suddenly much more distrustful of stuff coming from external, it also means they are more trusting of stuff that's coming from internal. So if you can fight internal phish and they've got one of those phishing banners, there's almost saying, hey, this will be okay because it's not got a big banner at the top that's blinding you when you try and read the email. Using a variety of vectors. So whilst email's pretty good and is probably the one that I default to most, try and use other things. So Teams messages, being able to, dump stuff on servers and refer people to it, that sort of thing. I don't know many SOCs that will look at lateral movement and go, hey, did that user send any emails? Did they send any Teams messages with attachments? That sort of thing. It starts to be harder and harder to dig into how people are moving across a network. It can be, yes. So, also try and vary payload or infrastructure. So if you're going to move from one place to another, don't be using the same payload that you were using initially. Use something different. So how can we do this? So UNC, the classic thing, Neil Lyons presented it here about 5 years ago. I sat and watched him in a workshop about using UNC paths to be able to capture credentials. Doing that when you're inside means that you've not got all the firewalls blocking those connections outbound. Using open shares to host maldocs, that sort of thing, means that you don't have to, you can avoid web gateways. You don't have to do all that hard work to get your payloads in. OWA, Outlook Web Access, really good way to be able to start firing emails and pretending to be someone. There's a bunch of toolkits that let you do it. Stealing Office 365 tokens. Office helpfully keeps plaintext versions of your O365 creds in memory. So if you compromise the host, you can just dump the creds for the O365 authentication. And then the Microsoft COM object, which is what Microsoft helpfully puts together for you to interface with Office products using PowerShell and things like that. You can do that to be able to start firing emails, or even in some cases use it as a full C2 over email. So, privilege escalation. So when we've got a compromised host on the network, you can eventually act like an internal honeypot for admins. So you can go, oh, this user's got a problem, or I've got a problem with this laptop, or hey, I'm this user, please can you log in and sort out my access because I can't seem to get Word running, and trigger an admin to log into you rather than trying to wait for the admin to log in. So ideally get the user to raise something, and get them to kind of raise a ticket so it looks even more legitimate, but raise it yourself if you can't. Try and make things seem operational rather than security related. You don't want an admin logging on because he thinks there's some sort of security issue on a box if you've got a payload running on it, unless you're really, really confident about how well hidden you are. So yeah, be aware that they're going to come looking for you. So password vaults, another really good source of kind of privilege escalation. A really high value target. If anywhere has defenses around it, if anywhere's going to notice you're attacking, it's probably the password vault. So rather than try and break in, instead let a trusted user go and break something out for you that you need. So go and compromise someone that you know will be doing work on that server or will pick up a ticket to do with X, Y, or Z, and then go and get one of those tickets raised in order so they go and break it out and go and break the password out for you, and then sit it on their little client that's likely got a lot less security than the big powerful password vault. So action on objectives, i.e. achieving what it is we want to do. So session hijacking is probably one of the ones that is used most at the moment. So you wait for a user to actively log into the web page or the application that they need to log into to do their work, at which point you can then drag their credentials out of memory, kind of dump whatever authentication they're using, use man in the browser if necessary, and kind of use their credentials that they've already authenticated with to piggyback on. Again, hanging around and waiting for these users to do that and then following them is kind of a bit boring. Doesn't drive towards your objectives very quickly. So, engaging the users, finding a reason why they need to log in, pushing them to go and do the thing, means that you kind of can trigger it using social engineering rather than having to sit and wait forever. Then, even in really kind of highly secure organizations, understandably, they all want to make money, and that often comes as a higher priority than we want to be really secure. So if you can work out based on internal recon, based on the things you've found from different areas that you've been inside the network, that there's some sort of business priority, you can push them to break security rules in order to accomplish your business priority. So that's why it's really important to understand the context and the job role and kind of the communications and daily activities of users you've compromised. Because if you're going to leverage one of them for some sort of, hey, I need this right goddamn now, then you need to know who it is that you're going to be speaking as. So yeah, important to know your kind of full recon of the environment, knowing what words to use, knowing what to refer to things as, knowing what security controls may or may not be in place process-wise for people doing things or not doing things. And then kind of the classic one is that there are situations I've heard of, I've spoken to friends who've done it, where you don't even need to do all of the prerequisites for getting into a red team. Literally phoning up, pretending to be the right person who needs the right thing right now can just get an objective. Particularly we're talking about like sensitive files or, commercial information or intellectual property. Just being able to call up and go, I've got this really urgent business need right now that I need to accomplish. So can you just send me the thing? Will sometimes work and will sometimes mean that you can kind of shortcut an entire adversary simulation operation and just cut right to the end and get to your objective. Cool. So that is the end. I think we've got 5 minutes. So, any questions? Yeah.
You spoke about how phishing is becoming more difficult to do. Have you ever done any social engineering that involves other kind of WhatsApp and other social messages that kind of systems that companies may use?
Yeah, so for those who can't hear, that question was whether there's any kind of using methods other than just email for kind of text-based social engineering, so phishing, and trying to come in through different channels. Yes, there is dangerous things around scope there because those types of accounts tend to get, like, Teams is pretty good for it and trying to shift into the kind of Microsoft ecosystem. When you start to go to like WhatsApp or LinkedIn or social media, you stand a really high chance of hitting people's home machines or personal information rather than business information and that sort of stuff. So yes, but it's very, very difficult to do it without treading on toes or causing potential legal issues and stuff. Yeah.
Just wondered, in your opinion, do you find that social engineering in this process is something that a certain type of person is more predisposed to do? Can it be learned in a way?
Yeah, so the question was, is there a certain type of person who's kind of predisposed to being good for physical or in-person social engineering? Yes and no. So I always, for those of you who are kind of D&D nerds, I always refer to it as that I maxed intelligence and dumped wisdom and then learned how to use my intelligence bonus for charisma. So there are ways you can use, you can look at the science of this, of how to do it to be able to learn how to use how to basically structure conversations and do the right things. Also, if you're nervous, if you're the stereotypical, IT nerd, you just make your pretext fit that. So going in and going, it's my first day, I'm really nervous, compensates for the fact that it's your first social engineering engagement and you're really nervous. So it gives you don't get quite as much flexibility if you are having to lock into those things, but yeah, you can still leverage them and you can still do it. Cool. Yes. Yeah, absolutely shed loads. So that was it. Are there any specific books or resources? Joe Gray's social engineering books, talks by Rachel Toback, Aleth Dennis, Chris Hadnagy. Chris Hadnagy's books are really good. And then you start to fall back onto like Cialdini's Principles of Trusts and the other kind of associated documents that are kind of old school con man or salesman texts are actually really, really useful. There's a big crossover between sales and social engineering, which makes me sad. But yeah, there we go.
Catch Me If You Can's a really good film about social engineering.
Yeah, and yeah, books wise, Catch Me If You Can, and TV and film wise, Catch Me If You Can. Some of the Don't Lie to Me, that sort of stuff are good watching, as well as social engineering adjacent. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.